And sometimes this really works. FOIA people, they're working in a very flawed system, but for the most part, I find them to be really good people who take their jobs very seriously, and they don't, they want to help you. They don't want to be obstructionist. Another thing you can do is you can sue. If 20 working days passes and nothing happens, you are actually in a position to file suit if you want. You can sue where you live. You can sue where the records are located, which is often D.C. As a default, you can always sue in D.C. I would tend to recommend, if you think about going this route, that you pick the place where you live, because the D.C. courts see lots and lots and lots of these cases, and they're not all that sympathetic to FOIA requesters, since D.C. is the government's home field. Another possibility is to contact this office. It's called the FOIA Ombudsman's Office. This is a fairly new thing. I don't actually have much of a sense yet how effective this is, but just in the past couple years, this office has been established that is intended to help mediate disputes between requesters and agencies. And so, potentially you could get this sort of, this middleman involved to try to, push the agency along and get something processed, and you won't have to spend the time to do that yourself. So, keep this in mind as a possibility. Like I said, I'm not quite sure yet how effective this office is, but, this is something that you can avail yourselves of if you want to. Or you can just wait. The first FOIA request I ever submitted went to the INS, which actually doesn't even exist anymore. And I assume this request has been rerouted somewhere, but I've never gotten a response, and that was like 8 years ago. So that kind of thing does happen, unfortunately. And sometimes you wait for like 2 years, and then you get a letter where they say, hey, we've had this request on file for 2 years and we haven't processed it yet. If you're still interested, let us know within a week and we'll process it. Otherwise, we'll just close the file. And you're like, what? But so that kind of thing happens. If you're just kind of, curious, and this is kind of for basic research purposes, there's no harm in waiting. But, there are some things you can do to speed it up. So what I just spoke about is what I think is the most likely scenario, but sometimes they do respond on time, and eventually they will respond at some point. And they often redact the files or just don't give it to you, right? We talked about the exemptions. So, there are these reasons why they might not give you the stuff that you've asked for. So what happens if they finally process your request and they refuse to give you what you want? You have to file an appeal. And this is very important. If you really don't care that much, I suppose you could just let it go. But if they respond, you cannot sue them until you file an appeal. So if you really think that you want to pursue the situation, you really want the stuff, you need to take this step. And the appeal letter is basically like, this is why you're wrong. And honestly, if you don't have any reasons why they're wrong, it's totally fine to send them a letter that just is a formality, just kind of checks the box that says, look, I think you're wrong. Like one sentence, I hope you'll reconsider your decision. And, once you've sent that letter, they again have 20 working days to respond. And if they don't respond, or if they say, sorry, we're sticking with our initial decision, then, you're perfectly situated to file suit if you want. And we talked a little bit about that before. So there are some really great resources out there that help with filing requests. The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press has a really wonderful set of state and federal open government guides, and also request generators that will basically fill in all the language that you need if you can just give them, the gist of what you're looking for. We've only talked today about federal open government laws, but each state and a lot of cities have their own open government laws, and some of them are very different, have their curious little distinctions. And so it's well worth taking a look at what the Reporters Committee has, to get a sense of, whether you're able to get the stuff you're looking for through a certain state law, and if you are, how much that would cost. But yeah, that's one of the very best resources I think I've ever seen. We have a FOIA FAQ as well. It's kind of geared more towards sort of practical advice. And so if you're kind of wondering how to formulate a request, or whether you might be able to ask for expedited processing, that's a great thing to look at. If you're really, really serious about pursuing FOIA requests, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, where I used to work, publishes a FOIA litigation manual that's about this thick. Comes out every couple years, and it goes through how to write a request, the history of the laws, the various exemptions and what the courts have said about them. It's a super useful thing if you anticipate spending a whole lot of time working on open government stuff. And I mentioned before the FOIA Ombudsman's Office. This is the Office of Government Information Services. And like I mentioned before, that can be a super, super useful resource. Well, I'm actually not sure if it's a super useful resource, but it is possible that they may be able to help you out if you're really in a struggle with an agency over some sort of FOIA-related matter. So, that's worth looking at as well if you're sort of in that position. So that's what I have. I assumed we'd probably do a lot of Q&A. I mean, I'd be very curious to hear, any particular questions you have about, ideas that you're thinking about for FOIA requests or Privacy Act requests, or, just, general questions about the laws. Yes, go ahead.
Right, two quick questions and one quick comment. The questions are, you could comment talking about FOIA requests, basically a recent financial form regulation at the FCC. The other question is going to be, you said that bloggers can get more information than somebody else. Why, or what part of what law gives a blogger more right access to something else? And the quick comment is, you're an attorney, this is wonderful. Why, you're giving a great presentation, but you're talking about some kind of law reform. I submit FOIA request. Nothing happens. You submit to the TSA, you can get your name on the no-fly list as a reward, but you don't get the information. So talk about what really happens in the real world instead of the theory. What do you mean?
Okay, so your first question was about financial regulation. Is that right? You wanted to know about FOIA with respect to the recent financial downturn and...
The documentation that this law says that the SEC no longer has to respond to FOIA requests.
Right. To be honest, I don't do a lot of requests in that area, so I really can't say how they have, turned out or what. There is a FOIA exemption we talked about earlier that exempts from disclosure materials that are basically related to financial investigations. And that exemption actually was in there, well before, the financial troubles of the last couple of years. I think it's a shame that happens to be in there, because I think we could have learned a whole lot more about, the causes of the downturn and, what the government has found about it if that exemption weren't there. But unfortunately, it is. And I wish I could tell you a little bit more about what FOIA requesters have experienced, trying to get information about that situation, but unfortunately I just don't know. Your second question was about bloggers and access to information. So bloggers and journalists, all right, they don't get preferential treatment in terms of actual access to information. Everybody is on the same playing field in terms of what they can access. But journalists can get special treatment in terms of how quickly the request gets processed. They can ask to have the request moved to the head of the line. And if the agency thinks that that's appropriate, the agency can do that. They can also get preferential treatment for fees. They may be charged less fees than, for example, some company that submits a FOIA request to get information about a competitor and the work that the competitor is doing for the government. But in terms of access to information, journalists don't get any preferential treatment. I want to make that clear. When you submit a FOIA request, you are entitled to the information that anybody else would be. You will get whatever you ask for as long as it's not exempt. And there is nobody who can show that they have a special need for that information so that you can't have it, or they can have it to the exclusion of you. I just want to make that clear. I think that's a very important point. And to that end, you never have to justify a FOIA request. You can ask for anything you want, and you don't have to explain why you want it or why you should get it. You also mentioned the practical realities of open government laws. This is absolutely true. I mean, I mentioned before that the system is terribly broken. The government has, amended the law several times to speed up the processing of these requests, to try to penalize agencies that don't comply. The fact of the matter is, when you submit a FOIA request, you have to be really diligent if you want it processed quickly. You have to take steps to make sure that it gets done. You have to take steps to push to have it answered in any sort of a timely manner. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This is why I wanted to tell you about the ombudsman and the possibility of suing. I am an attorney, and I have found that often we get the best responses when we file suit. Because at that point, you drag a judge into the whole thing, and an agency has to justify to the judge why they're being so slow, and to simply say, look, we've got a lot of stuff to do. Sorry, that just doesn't work with a judge, and the judge has the power to say, you will process this and you'll do it in a week. So, I think that the FOIA process works the best when you've got requesters who are very aggressive and do whatever they can to push the system forward, because you can't expect that you're going to get the stuff that you want in the 20 working days you're supposed to get it. And this is particularly true with certain agencies. I'll tell you, the FBI has a terrible backlog. There are requests that sit there for years. But if you're really good about pushing your cause, I think you can get it done faster. Yes?
What's the ballpark for the fees? Is it $20, $2,000, $20,000?
It totally depends on the amount of stuff. If there are like 50 pages that are responsive to the request, they probably won't charge you for it at all. If it's like 10,000 pages, they may charge you like thousands of dollars. I will say that you will have the opportunity, if they charge you a lot of money, you have the opportunity to appeal and basically explain why it should be less or why there shouldn't be anything. And the other thing is, one thing you can do is in your request you can say, I'm willing to pay X amount of dollars in fees, whatever, $20. If it's going to be more than that, let me know. And then if they get back to you and say, hey, look, we're thinking this is going to be like 2,000 pages, we're thinking it's going to be, maybe, this amount of money, then you can maybe talk to them about sort of narrowing the scope of the request or sort of negotiating some sort of a solution to make it so that you don't have to pay that amount of money. Yes, behind you, yeah.
Are previous requests archived in case somebody wants similar information? Do you keep wait times down?
That's a really good question. I think that the agencies keep all the requests on file. I actually recently submitted a FOIA request to see if EFF had an FBI file, and it turned out that all they had on EFF were our FOIA requests. And some of the filings that we had done in some of our lawsuits against the government. But I don't think there's any requirement that they have to keep every FOIA request on file, but I'm sure they do. If you wanted to, I think a really interesting FOIA strategy could be, I want all of the requests that, so-and-so has submitted, somebody that you're interested in who, does FOIA work along the lines you're interested in, and say, I want all the documents that are responsive to those requests. Yes? That's still a completely open question. And actually at EFF, we're interested in cases like that because we think that that's a really good opportunity